Bienvenue tout le monde.
Welcome, everyone, to meeting number 35 of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. Pursuant to Rule 1083F of the Rules of Procedure and the motion adopted on April 21st, 2026, we are meeting today to consider the preliminary draft regulations on the use of French in private businesses under federal jurisdiction. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. Federation of Francophone and Acadian Communities of Canada, we have Alain Dupuis, Executive Director, Liane Roy, President. Welcome once again. You will have 5 minutes to deliver your opening remarks. Afterward, we will proceed to question and answer period with the committee members. Over to you for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, hello. I thank you for having invited us to appear to comment on the draft regulations on the use of French in federally regulated private businesses. It is often called the UFPBA. My name is Liane Roy, and I am here with Alain Dupuis, the Executive Director of FCFA Canada. You are all familiar with the purpose and the objectives of the UFPBA. Our emphasis today will be on the role of the UFPBA as a support for the vitality of Francophone communities in minority situations. And this objective is what is at the heart of the right to be served in French and to work in this language. The Act also recognizes the diversity of linguistic programs in the provinces and territories, and it encourages a differentiated approach in order to contribute to the advancement of substantive equality of French and English all around the country. The draft regulations and its accompanying tools does lay down some parameters in this sense. However, there are a number of elements that still require improvement. The criteria used in the draft regulations identify regions recognized as being mostly Francophone, but it does leave aside a number of regions that have a critical mass of Francophones, as well as communities in rural and remote regions. The same problem can be observed with the minimal threshold for the number of employees for designated businesses. At least 25 employees in Quebec, but at least 100 in the rest of Canada in regions with a strong Francophone presence. Note that a majority of private businesses under federal jurisdiction are small businesses with fewer than 20 employees, and such a threshold will exclude a large part of businesses that are targeted and will reduce the real impact of the Act. We recognize that the linguistic requirements can have economic impacts on businesses that are concerned. But if we really want to promote French and fight against assimilation and support the vitality of Francophone communities around the country, the demographic weight of Francophones is the only way for is the only target for big businesses, but that's not enough. French and Francophone communities are part of Canada's DNA and identity. It is legitimate, then, that businesses that serve these communities contribute to preserving and using French. The FCFA proposes a methodology that, if it is similar to that of Canadian heritage, actually is after a higher level of precision. We propose using a more targeted census scale. This is for the dissemination area. By combining the 20% threshold in terms of potential demand for services in French, this way we capture a larger zone where the Francophone presence is significant. Think of the Acadian community of Chéticamp, which is not captured by the methodology proposed by Canadian Heritage, but it is by the one that we're proposing. As you know, this is a community that is well established, and it's a majority on its own territory and has its own institutions. Our approach also includes the designation of provincial and territorial capitals, harmonization with designations existing provincially in Ontario and in Manitoba, as well as the use of vitality criteria such as immigration hubs, historic communities, and the presence of Francophone institutions. The other recommendations include, but are not limited to, the establishment setting it at 25 employees for the minimal threshold for applying the Act in regions with a strong Francophone presence, requiring services in French in emergency situations when it comes to transportation, making it mandatory to share with the Commissioner of Official Languages the list of private businesses that fall under the Act, and the review of the regulations every 5 years in order to keep up with changing demographics in the country. And also the principle of not being able to backtrack. The Act is a new Act, and so this regulation is an opportunity to start off on the right foot and to establish the principles recognized by the Act and, by extension, by the Official Languages Act, the OLA. I thank you, and I am ready to take your questions along with Alain, our Executive Director. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madame Roy. And you spoke for exactly 5 minutes. Thank you for being such a good role model for your colleagues. Let's go to questions now. Colleagues, since we started a little late, I'm going to be a little stricter with the time you have. Mr. Godin, over to you for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, I would like to table a motion that I sent last week, and I would like to talk about it at this point. I believe it's important so that we can do our work properly as MPs. And we will have to have all the tools available so that we can take advantage of what we have and make sure that there are no oversights. This applies to the Treasury Board and the department. It's important to remember, Mr. Chair, that Ms. Joly, who was the minister at the time in 2021, well, we have to be able to set up a committee of experts to study the implementation of new rights and requirements as proposed in the modernization of the Act. This was announced publicly on March 5th, 2021. So I will read the motion and then I will give you my argument. Notice of motion, MP Godin, May 20th, 2026. Considering that the Honourable Mélanie Joly had made the announcement of the creation of a committee of experts and with the objective of studying the implementation of new rights and obligations proposed as part of the modernization of the Official Languages Act, considering that this committee, whose mandate will be to prepare recommendations around the possible recourses for workers and consumers, as well as criteria for recognizing regions with strong Francophone presence outside of Quebec. Considering that this committee will also have to consult representatives of different unions that are accredited and represent employees and workers of businesses under federal jurisdiction and representatives from different levels of government, the FCFA, that's something that I'm adding to the list, and other official languages in minority situations. And considering that despite the importance of this work, no report or recommendations that are official were made public, not up to date. And so the committee requires, pursuant to Section 108, would establish this committee with the goal of studying the new rights and requirements as part of the modernization of the Official Languages Act, and within the 15 calendar days following the adoption of this motion. Mr. Chair, I think it's important that we be able to use all the data. My colleague, Ms. Chainette, often uses the fact that there is data within the government, and we need to take inspiration from those. Considering that this was done by the government under Mr. Trudeau, and under Ms. Joly, who was the minister at the time. She was the minister of official languages at the time. And so there was more attention paid to official languages at the time. I have a press release here that announces it, the expert committee. And I think this is the least we can do. If we want to do our job properly as MPs, we have to have that data. Perhaps Canadian Heritage and the TBS might be involved here, but I think that it's important that we have that data so that we can look into it and see what can be done with it. And this will be useful. It's going to actually be beneficial for both official languages here in Canada in a context where we are reviewing the regulations of Part 2 of the Modernization Act for the Official Languages Act. So, Mr. Chair, I would invite all members around the table to accept my request and ensure that within 15 calendar days, that the results of this report be tabled. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Gaudin. I have some other names on my list. Before I go forward, I'd just like to explain to the witnesses what's happening right now. This might not be the first time that you're seeing something like this, but I want it to be clear for everybody who's here for the first hour and the second hour. When there is a motion tabled, before coming back to our witnesses, we have to finish up with the debate on that motion. So I would ask for your patience, and we'll see how things proceed. And I'll do my best to maximize our time with our witnesses. Mr. Deschênes-Thériault, over to you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the spirit of collaboration, at the beginning of the session, we adopted a work plan, and we agreed that our number one priority would be focus on the Official Languages Act Modernization Bill. We don't have a lot of time left, so I think we should concentrate on that work, and we agreed to prioritize that. At this point, I don't really see the relevance of Mr. Gaudin's motion. He refers to a committee from 2021. The idea wasn't to make the report public, it was rather to equip the government. And since we have the Modernization Act and the regulations that were made public over the last month, that is the draft regulations, things have evolved since. And in the study, there are different regulations we've done over the last months. We've had a myriad of experts, and today we have witnesses who have prepared themselves to come share their perspectives with us. They've traveled here, and I think out of respect for those experts who are going to help us with their work, I think we should concentrate on what they have to say. So, Mr. Chair, I suggest that we adjourn debate on this. So this is a dilatory motion. I would ask for the vote.
Merci, monsieur.
The motion. Is it to adjourn debate on this topic? Yes, indicates the chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the vote is on the adjournment of the vote.
Madame Chenette.
Oui.
Madame Mingarelli.
Oui.
Monsieur Villeneuve.
Oui. Oui.
Monsieur d'Entremont.
Oui.
Monsieur Elcoury.
Oui.
Monsieur Godin.
Non.
Monsieur Bélanger.
Non.
Monsieur Dalton.
Non.
Monsieur Gill.
Non.
Monsieur Beaulieu.
Non.
6 pour, 5 contre.
Donc, je déclare la...
In this case, the motion has been adopted and debate on the matter is adjourned. Let's go back to our witnesses. Mr. Gaudin, you still have the floor for 6 minutes. Unfortunately, Mr. Chair, I'm going to have to take my time to counter the arguments given by my colleague. He opted to close the debate, and you know this majority government has been muzzling us more and more. It is not a lack of respect when these are parameters that have been established when we set our calendar. This is part of the process for being better in participating in the review of the Act, the UFPBA. Now we're seeing shortcuts being taken. I just want to remind everyone around the table here that the Act was sanctioned. It had royal assent June of 2023. And now we're talking about shortcuts and saying, we don't have enough time. 3 years. So with all due respect, and when we're talking about respectful timelines, I am very disappointed. But this is only the beginning. And this tells us what we're going to have to live through in the coming months, considering that the government is now in a majority position. Following those who crossed the floor. Now, Mr. Chair, I'll turn over to our witnesses. Ms. Roy and Mr. Dupuis, welcome. You are regulars here at the committee. I would like to have your opinion. When? Well, in 2023, we were studying a matter, and you were very involved in that. Part 2 of the Act, the UFPBA, there was a proposal made by the Bloc Québécois and supported by the Conservatives and reinforced by the Conservatives because there was a procedural matter that the Bloc had to withdraw. And at the very last minute, right before the vote, the government of Quebec decided that they would come up with an agreement or a deal with the Canadian government. And remember that in the context, it was a minority government at the time, and the NDP had clearly indicated that they would vote in favor of the fact that in Quebec, the institution that would be responsible for upholding the French language in businesses under the federal jurisdiction was going to be the Office de la Langue Française. My question is quite simple. Do you think that Jean-François Roberge, who was the minister at the time of the government of Quebec, did any favors to francophones across the country by making a deal with the federal government?
I don't have an answer. I don't really have an answer to give you, Monsieur Godin. I'll ask another question. I'm not trying to box you in here, but let me say this other way. Would it be acceptable that the government... I think it's up to the...
I think it's up to Quebec to take that decision. You would be a great politician. Unfortunately, Quebecers did not take that decision. It was a minister who imposed it. That is sad, and later in time, Quebecers will realize it. That's what I think. So let's get right into the topic. In your opening remarks, you mentioned that there are things that can be improved in the UFPBA, including, and you well articulated it, some regions which would not be covered. And you talked about numbers of employees and thresholds. In your opinion, what would be the best rule that could be used to determine which regions would be covered? You talked about capitals, you talked about schools. Let's take the example of Halifax. Halifax is not even considered. So federally regulated businesses will not even be required to work in French there. You talked about other towns, including one in New Brunswick, or Nova Scotia rather, Chitika. From what I understood, the dominant language in that region is French, but statistically speaking, the numbers there would not permit it to be defined and covered under the Act. So tell me, in your opinion, what would be the criteria we should use to ensure we protect French everywhere in Canada? 55 seconds remaining.
We suggest that the area of dissemination is expanded. StatsCan has different ways to count and to receive data. What we're suggesting is the area of dissemination be changed. Right now, the Heritage Canada measures this differently. Right now, there are 2,500 people who live in the area, and that's what's counted, and the minority criteria must be evaluated differently. This can also be done by looking at the capital, but if we look at Canada as a whole, the dissemination area allows us to evaluate this more precisely. Your time is up. I'm sorry. Okay, now over to Mr. Entremont for 6 minutes. Okay, thank you very much. We're talking about Nova Scotia. I'll continue to talk about Nova Scotia. Thank you, Monsieur Godin, for highlighting Nova Scotia. When we examine regions in Nova Scotia that are small and don't have a lot of services provided to them, what will the new regulations change and be positive for these regions? What could we change to make sure that things are truly changed for these regions? Thank you for your question. I'll take the time to finish what I was saying. So we are talking about the dissemination area. This will let us calculate and find out where Francophones really are so that rural and remote areas with higher concentrations of Francophones get covered. We want to make sure that people have services provided to them in their language and that they can work in French. As we see further immigration of Francophones to Canada, we want to be able to provide them services and job opportunities. If you look at the map, you will see that there are clusters with high concentrations of Francophones across the country. But these are not all calculated in the same way that Heritage Canada calculates this. The main problem is that Francophones are spread everywhere. It's kind of the same thing in Toronto. Toronto is used as an example. It's a main city, but it's not in the list. There's a city with the most Francophones in Canada, but they don't all live in the same neighborhood. So we need to find other ways to count where the Francophones are. And that's why we need this by capital, by province, and by territory. We are giving services in regions.
Les services sont pas nécessaires.
The services are not necessarily there. In Ashitigan, they might not have government services. The same thing goes for the Southwest. I'm talking about government services. This is the same case for banks and credit unions. These are in main English centers. So how can we work with these businesses to make sure that they offer French services? I think we can do this by targeting these communities with smaller dissemination areas. Some communities have one bank branch or a small store. I think it's important for us, by shrinking the demographic zone, we can target these smaller communities. I think the federal government must have a role to play in supporting these businesses so that they can follow this law. So let's talk about urban regions. In Nova Scotia, the largest region that has a Franco-Acadian community is Dartmouth. Halifax, Dartmouth. But that's not on the list. How does this explain itself? Well, that's why we suggested the other system to calculate the regions. And in this, can you explain a little further? So first and foremost, we take the same 20% criteria, but we are making the unit of measurement smaller. So this is going to target a larger amount of people. And we also add other criteria. Areas with schools that are French, for example. The capitals are important because they have the main services and schools. There's often a flourishing Francophone community in these capitals. That doesn't mean the entire capital will be targeted, but we can take one neighborhood, for example, and see where are the institutions in Halifax, for example, and see in this area of dissemination, can we offer more services, more branches, more telecoms, or more public transport? Okay, so you're talking about in this region, for example, in Dartmouth. The schools are there, the high school, the primary school. So you're hoping that there will be a bank that can offer French services there. Yes, absolutely. That's what we're suggesting. We also know that in major cities and in capitals, that's the main area that Francophones are migrating to. We now have 39,000 immigrants in these communities. So, and this number is going to increase. So it's important to uphold these services. I would just like to add, I'm from Toronto. For years, I'm trying to attract people to come to Etobicoke Center, but they're not listening. And now the floor is yours. Thank you. The dissemination area, I think this is a good tool. Eventually, maybe we can reduce the threshold to 15%. And then we can play with these thresholds. Instead of playing on indicators, the 25% we talked about, it's rather 25. We're talking about 25 employees in Quebec and 100 employees outside of Quebec. You are suggesting that across Canada, it's 25 employees. I think that's a good thing. Certificates to promote French. That's 100 employees and more. That's outside of Quebec. Do you have that outside of Quebec? I think that would be important because it would generalize the use of French in businesses. I would just like to add on that. For us, the regulation is not clear about how everything surrounding businesses outside of Quebec works. We have a regime that's similar to Bill 101, but we don't have the same framework for French language committees. There are very few reports that are mandatory. For us, this would be something we would really like to see in this regulation. Even in Quebec, they can have mandatory French committees independent of the size of the number of employees. Now, on the UFPBA, it would be interesting that the UFPBA is also applicable in territories with a strong proportion of Francophones. The dissemination area would cover Toronto. Yes, it would cover many more regions. We have maps. We overlapped the data to show the dissemination area that shows us where we would achieve 20%. Toronto, some parts of it would reach 20%, but there are other things we suggest, like a strong number of Francophone institutions that would allow for large areas and city centers like Toronto to have more services. So as a whole, Toronto doesn't have enough Francophones, but if you take different parts of Toronto, then there are probably neighborhoods. Absolutely. Okay, I find that very interesting. As French language commissioner, it's a question of the consumer for services. There are is no talk of the promotion of the French language with programs in the UFPBA. I think the commissioner must be able to investigate. One of our recommendations is the list of businesses under the UFPBA be given to the official language commissioner to facilitate investigations and also for education and promotion. Everything is in what is in the minister's hands. We don't think it's sufficient. It is a system based on if things are flagged or not. And we don't have a list that goes hand in hand with the one that was tabled. The list should be given to the commissioner. Should it be mandatory that it's in function of the complaints? A lot of people usually won't complain, especially employees. I think they should be able to investigate. Do you have other suggestions that you didn't have time to talk about? We do have some. We want there to be a principle that they can't backtrack. So once an area is designated as a high proportion of francophones, when it comes to the next analysis, they can't be removed from the list. We'd also like to be able to track the demographic evolution, so we want the law to be reviewed every 5 years. Let's look at Toronto. Over the last 3 years in Toronto, there was 15,000 Francophone immigrants in 3 years. So if we take time to put this act into place, we will miss out on some communities that are evolving. Thank you. Your time is up. Colleagues, we will move on to the second round. Mr. Gill, the floor is yours.
Is to decide which outside Quebec have a strong Francophone presence. In your view, should the government also consider qualitative factors like French language schools, Francophone institutions, and the historic presence of Francophone communities?
Absolutely. I think that ce sont des éléments que nous considérons dans notre proposition.
These are things that we consider in our suggestions, and we think that we must take into the historic past of communities. How can we revitalize French in some of these communities? We would like to make sure that we don't just look at numbers in percentages, but absolute numbers of francophones. Big cities like Toronto that have almost 200,000 francophones, these don't currently fall under the Act. But these francophones have the right to live in French and to receive French services and to work in French, even in regions that are mostly Anglophone.
Mr. Chair, I give the floor to Mr. Godin.
OK. Monsieur Godin, la parole est à vous.
Chers collègues,
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's talk about Toronto. What is Toronto's status when it comes to the official languages according to the province? For French services in Ontario, Toronto is in this category, so they are supposed to give services in French in Toronto. In your opinion, does Ontario try to encourage French and make it grow in Ontario? I don't know, but I think because there are laws that designate the regions, we should hold into account these two regions. Unfortunately, in these provinces, if there is a law on services in French that designates regions, it should be held into account when the areas with high proportions of francophones are examined. From what I understand, there are 4 provinces in Canada that have tools to help French grow. There's Manitoba, Quebec, Ontario, and New Brunswick. And you're showing us here that these provinces are more active than the federal government, yet the federal government is supposed to preserve bilingualism, French and English, in Canada across all provinces and territories. Do you not see a contradiction? Well, let's not get confused here. Government services that the federal government offers across Canada, but when it comes to the private sector, this is what we're talking about, because we would like to expand the possibility to live and to receive services in the private sector. But what I'm saying, Monsieur Roy, Monsieur Dupuis, what I'm saying is that there are tools in 4 provinces to increase French, the French fact, in businesses. No, only the law, the act on French services is only in businesses.
The federal government has a greater responsibility. There is a model, there's concentration. Those 4 provinces, well, French is very important for them. It's the common language. New Brunswick is the only legal one, and then there's the other ones. But the federal government has an additional responsibility to expand the French fact across the country. Well, it's been declining, but at least protect official languages. So should we not take inspiration from that to establish your criteria in order to expand it? And second of all, while I'm at it, there is an asymmetry here. We can't just copy and paste everything everywhere. In some regions, it's more concentrated, but they're rural areas. They're more remote, more closed off. I think that they should be considered, and the dissemination area is a tool, yes, but give us some ideas. How can we give you material tools so that we can really expand the French fact in Canada? Unfortunately, your time is up. Perhaps you'll have the opportunity to respond at a future round. Mr. Deschamps-Thériault, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In one of the responses you gave, you spoke about the idea of no backtracking. Can you let us know a little more about this and what the potential impacts would be? Thank you for the question. This principle was put in place because we want to fight assimilation. This idea of a binding principle with no backtracking, well, it's established in a region. We would like it to be conserved, even if there is a decline on the demographic front, and we suggest that this be during 2 regulation review periods, so about 10 years, because we really want to counter, the possibilities of assimilation. Thank you. You spoke to this earlier, but you talked about expanding the regions where the UFPBA applies. Yellowknife and Toronto, Halifax, just to name a few. Can you tell us, why would that be important for Francophones in those regions? I'd like to better understand. Can you expand on that? Well, as with Canadians in general, Francophones, well, there are a number of regions, Francophone regions, where we're seeing the number of Francophones decline, and in fact they're in cities more and more, and so we're broadening the services we're seeing in Francophones in larger towns. So if we apply 20%, well, this is where we are not sufficiently capturing those numbers with what's being proposed by Canadian Heritage. That's the urban reality. So by adding the capitals And certain communities, key ones like Halifax and Toronto, these are, immigration cities. So that would allow us to keep up with those demographic trends. And the trend is towards urbanization. And so we'll use the same criteria, 20%. We're not, exaggerating here, 20%, but we would reduce the area. And that would allow us to capture those neighborhoods and the branches in those neighborhoods. And perhaps that will encourage Francophones to settle in certain zones, and that will actually enhance their vitality. That's a good thing. And that would be in line with the linguistic and socioeconomic studies on the matter. And as you know, we have a diversified Francophone riding. Reality is not the same everywhere, and in some regions there are fewer Francophones. Which levers can the government use to make sure that this act has an impact also in communities where the Francophone presence is maybe a little more fragile? How would you ensure there'd be a real impact in those areas? Well, there's also criteria such as the presence of Francophone schools, and the government, in Part 4 of the Official Languages Act a few years ago, the government added the presence of a Francophone school for designating federal offices that have to offer services in French. So for us, taking into account the presence of schools, Francophone daycares, or Francophone organizations in zones that might not be designated, while that would allow us to designate neighborhoods where there is vitality, even if the 20% threshold isn't met. And throughout the country, there are a number of places where provincial laws exist and government services are available in French and English. But the idea behind the Act for businesses under federal jurisdiction, this is a new idea. And for Canada outside of Quebec, could you speak to the importance of this Act that we're studying right now and that was adopted a few years ago, the UFPBA? You have 45 seconds left. Well, it will definitely help with the vitality of our communities. It's very important to give people opportunities to work in their language and to get services in their language. I think, and you're going to see when reading our brief, what we're proposing, well, it would mean that I think we could reach a number of communities this way, and also historical communities, as we mentioned. In the past, they were very Francophone, but more and more they're becoming more Anglophone, or perhaps more concentrated on other languages. But that would be very important for the vitality of our communities. Thank you, Mr. Deschanteriot. I'll now hand it over to Mr. Beaulieu. 2.5 minutes. I'm happy to hear about the schools. You already answered that question. Another aspect, the follow-up to all of this, complaints to the commissioner, for example, that will require a budget, a significant budget. We often heard that there weren't enough resources to follow up on complaints that are made to the commissioner. Do you have any specific proposals on that front? That is to say, for, enhancing that budget for the Commissioner of Official Languages? Well, I think it's quite evident if the commissioner has to investigate, and we're talking about, many organizations, that is private businesses. Well, it goes without saying that the commissioner will have to ask for additional votes in order to have a bigger budget to investigate in the case of complaints. I think that'll also require more work on your part, because for people to file complaints, well, there would have to be, awareness campaigns. That'll be the minister's responsibility, but people will have to be made aware of all of this so they can file a complaint if they wish to. Earlier, you talked about being aware of the list of private businesses which are under federal jurisdiction. That's a very good idea. But I think it's going to require a little more work. And I'll just remind you that the UFPBA is based on the territoriality principle. Territory with a strong Francophone presence. For a long time now, we've been proposing this. It's part of, Bill 101, and often we were told, that'll be no good for Francophones outside of Quebec. But indeed, the model based on territory, well, There's nothing bad about it. On the contrary, it ensures that in regions with a strong Francophone presence, we're able to counter assimilation and encourage newcomers to speak French. Well, when it comes to territoriality, as defined in this regulation, is not an advantage for Francophones in minority situations. So actually, the proposal that we're making, that is to use the dissemination area, that would allow us to have a program that can be used in all provinces and territories. But with the current model, unfortunately, for a number of our Francophone communities, they're actually disadvantaged by the measures used. Mr. Beaulieu, I apologize, but your time is up. I'll now hand it over to Mr. Bélanger, 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you to our witnesses. I see that the city of Sudbury is an admissible city. Does that include only the city of Sudbury proper, or the greater region of Sudbury? Actually, it includes a large part of it. I'm actually from Henmer, so I know the region well. And it includes the greater area of Sudbury, but not Algoma, the next door. So Elliott Lake, Blind River, St. Marie, there's significant Francophone presence, but they're not captured by it. But if the measuring units was changed and we opted for dissemination area, then Algoma, St. Marie would be included in the definition of a region with a strong Francophone presence. Okay, so in this context, I'm trying to understand how many private businesses would be, would qualify for the program. Banks or businesses with more than 100 employees. I can't think of a lot of examples of who would be affected. Do you think that the regulation would really improve access to services in French in the rural community where most businesses don't meet this criteria? That's an excellent question. That's why we also want the 25 employee threshold that's used for Quebec. We'd also like that to be applied to regions with a strong Francophone presence outside of Quebec. So a lot more businesses in your riding would be included in that. Assimilation. First of all, it's all good to have laws with a little more teeth, but how can we really enforce them? And if I go by my personal experience, even with banks, it says on the sign, we speak French here, but I show up at the counter, I speak in French, and nobody can serve me in French, and they ask me to come back in 5 minutes when somebody who speaks French can help me. Well, that doesn't work. So if we want to promote French, we have to live in French and work in French. That'll give you the opportunity to be served in French. But in situations like that, it's easier for me to just say, no, forget it. I'll talk to you in English rather than wait, because I don't have time to wait. And it doesn't just happen at the bank. It happens at other situations too. So what do you think of situations like that? How do we fix that? Well, the objective of having this regulation that applies to the private sector, that's already significant because it sends a message that French is important. It's not just within a family or at school. We also use French in the public domain too. But it has to be supported by other strategies, such as continuing to encourage Francophone immigration outside of Quebec, reinforcing access to schools, post-secondary institutions in French as well. In your region, as you know, there are a lot of French programs that were cut out at Laurentian University, for example. Well, we have to revive those and bring them back so that a region like ours can continue to have more and more people who speak French and therefore be able to offer the services in French in the medium and long terms. Thank you. If I have a little time left over, I'll give it to my colleague. 15 seconds, Mr. Godin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Earlier, you said something. It's quite surreal. Well, irrealistic. when you apply something and then we want results. There are very few reports. There's no accountability. There are no requirements. There are no oversight tools. A lot of good intentions, but it's mostly for show, and we think that the magic wand is going to make it all happen. Can you explain to us, give us a little more details as to what we should include in this regulation? 35 seconds. What I think is important is that we ensure there be accountability, as you mentioned. That will be paramount. We have to have the list of businesses so that we can work well before complaints are filed. As mentioned, and you'll see that in our brief, it'll also be very important to designate or to lay out more criteria. We talked about dissemination areas, for example. The UFPBA has to promote French as being a language of work and so on. The French language can't just be relegated. It can't just be considered, a language. I'm sorry, Ms. Roy. I left you a little extra time, but I really have to cut you off now. Thank you very much. Over to our last MP, Mr. Villeneuve, the last 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Ms. Roy and Mr. Dupuis. You spoke to this a little bit earlier, but I'd like to come back to this topic. Can you please explain to me in greater detail the reasons behind your proposal for reviewing the regulation every 5 years? Can you give us some more details, please? Yes, most definitely. The good news is that Francophone demographics, well, we're starting to see the results of the higher Francophone immigration targets. 30,000 people per year. A couple of years ago, we were at 6,000. So with immigration, we're seeing a renewed vitality within our communities. But let's say if we keep the current thresholds, 300,000 people more that are part of the Canadian francophonie. So do we have to wait another 3 to 5 years for that, or do we have a census every 5 years that allows us to keep tabs on that demographic change? Why not just update the regulation every 5 years in light of the most recent census, and then we can add neighborhoods and dissemination areas? And it'll be a much more continuous process, and it'll show that we're more serious about, making progress with services available in French outside of Quebec. Thank you. You're also proposing that we reinforce accountability measures, especially by requiring that the Commissioner of Official Languages be given the list of private businesses under federal jurisdiction. Can you give us a little more explanation on that? What is behind that proposal? What is the rationale, and what's the impact? Well, I think the committee discussed this over the last weeks. There is no list, and so that means that there cannot be any, advocacy done among those businesses. So, if there's a list that is put together, the minister puts together and designates, 100 or 1,000 businesses in the country, make it public, share it with the commissioner, then the commissioner will be able to do his or her work and not just, follow up on a complaint, also promote French. And then others can go towards those businesses when they want to recruit or carry out other activities. That way people will be more aware of the French services that are out there. This has to be done in unison, not something that's done in silos or in secrecy. All of the work around promotion and advocacy, that will have to be done within the communities as well. Thank you. Thank you. That's quite clear. Very good answer. Thank you. What mechanisms should be put in place to ensure that Francophone consumers really have access to French services? For example, a Francophone consumer and a telecommunications company or a bank, how could those situations be dealt with? Well, a lot of work will have to be done on that front. Francophones currently are not used to showing up in the public domain and getting service in their language. So there's going to have to be, awareness campaigns and so on. It will have to be a new reflex, a new habit for Francophones to ask for service in their language. And this will mean possibilities for Francophones to go work in places where they couldn't work before. So this would modify behaviors a little bit, and this might push the boundaries a little bit, and they'll insist that their language be respected in the workplace. So there definitely will be work that needs to be done on the part of employers, and within the public. Is there anything else that we should take into account as part of this study on the draft regulations? You have about 45 seconds left. Well, we've gone over just about all of our main recommendations. Now, we read the regulation. Currently, as things stand, it's very much based on complaints. That's how compliance is going to be withheld. If I look at the Commissioner Official Languages, that's once the problem has occurred, then there's an investigation, and then corrective measures are taken. But there's also Canadian Heritage and the Treasury Board Secretariat. The TBS requires triannual reports for federal institutions. There's no equivalent in this regulation. So there's no requirement for these businesses to submit reports, and there's no verification by the Department of Canadian Heritage, no efforts upstream to avoid problems before they happen. So that's a huge shortcoming. So there's no double mechanism for the private sector. So I think it will be 100% based on Francophones who are activists and who insist on having their rights upheld. And that's unfortunate, that there weren't additional preventive measures there for citizens. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Villeneuve. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you, Ms. Roy, Mr. Dupuis. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your work with your organization. Colleagues, I'm going to suspend for a few moments so that we can change panels. I would ask that we proceed quickly so that we can maximize our time with our witnesses. Thank you once again. I'll suspend the meeting.
Welcome back, everyone. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-3F and the motion adopted on April 21st, 2026, we are meeting today to consider the draft regulations on the use of French in federally regulated private businesses. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. From the Francophonie Assembly of Ontario, or the AFO, we have Peter Homeniuk, Executive Director. Welcome. We have Sonia Bellil, Director of Policy and Government Relations. Did I pronounce your name properly? Bellil? Yes? Thank you. And from the Canadian Bankers Association, we have Eric Prudhomme, Executive Director, Government Relations, Quebec and Atlantic. We also have Christian Petitfrère, Senior Legal Counsel. Thank you all for being here. Each organization will have 5 minutes to deliver its opening remarks. We will then proceed to a question and answer session with the committee members. Mr. Homeniuk, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I would like to thank you for having us here today. My colleague is with us today, as well as our political analyst. The AFO is the voice of Franco-Ontarians since the 1970s. We represent thousands of Francophones outside of Quebec. We would like to favorably welcome the act on the UFPBA. This act is very important because it will touch on Francophones' lives and on their daily lives. Designating strong Francophone presence in regions is very important. Defining these regions is how their rights will be recognized. There is a first list of areas, and it covers many areas in the east and the north of the province mostly. This will allow a minimum amount of protection, and it shouldn't be reduced. The administration of this law shouldn't be reduced to just the region that is calculated. The stats aren't the only thing that speaks to this. This is lived daily in schools, in colleges, in daily life, in healthcare, in the economy, and in the hallways. In some regions, the proportion of Francophones is very high, and in other regions, it's high just with the numbers. This is what we're hearing from a Francophone organization in Ontario. The French in Ontario has a historic foundation. The numbers might not fully represent the situation. The community is much larger than just the numbers say. The CFA is recommending a review, reviewing the institutions, the area, and services. This means that the Act should designate a territorial area, and it is disconnected from the current situation. The Act would respect the spirit of the law and protect Franco-Ontarians' right to receive services in French. The regulations should target areas without ambiguity. Businesses must be accountable, and consumers must know where their rights are applicable. With the survey and reviewing the proportion of Francophones in areas, there might be some missing out on numbers. Instead of servicing Francophones, there might be divisions. Now, when it comes to the application, it shouldn't just be up to individuals to complain. Many Francophones just receive services in English because it's too much of a bother to ask for services in French, or they don't know they are allowed to. There are many obstacles. So it's important to have an application of the law Mr. Chair, we think that this could become an important lever to strengthen services and to offer services in French in minority regions. So that this act can achieve its full potential, it must serve Franco-Ontarians. Franco-Ontarians must be able to receive services, work in French, and fully participate in the economy in French. The program would recognize the reality of Franco-Ontarians in their own community. Thank you. That was 5 minutes. I'd like to give the floor to Monsieur Prudhomme. Hello, I am Mr. Eric Prudhomme. I am the Executive Director of Government Relations for Quebec and the Atlantic region at the Canadian Bankers Association. My colleague, Christian Petitfrère, Senior Legal Counsel at the CBA, is joining me today. We thank you for giving us the opportunity to discuss the proposed regulations on the use of French in federally regulated private businesses. Before I continue, I'd like to say that we had the same arguments last night in front of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. We presented this to the ministers who were responsible for official languages and identity and culture. We recognize the fundamental importance of Canada's 2 official languages, and we are doing everything possible to serve Francophones in the language of their choice. The bank recognizes that it is of utmost importance that Francophones can work in their language when they are in a community that is located in a region with a strong Francophone presence. In regions with strong Francophone presence, such as Quebec, of course, but also in New Brunswick and in Eastern Ontario, major banks also already offer these French services. Clients all over Canada can access services in French by phone, online, and through web platforms. Thanks to the massive investments banks have made in technology, today more than ever, both Francophone and Anglophone customers have a greater number of simple and convenient ways to access financial products and services. These investments have clearly improved the way banks communicate and interact with their customers, as well as their internal operations. As a result, no matter where they are, French-speaking customers can access certain banking documents in French. Studies show that a majority of consumers use digital banking services and banking apps, and that these technological advancements allow them to conduct their banking transactions from anywhere in the country. At the same time, traditional bank branches present in rural communities that are both small and large remain an important part of the Canadian banking network. The banking sector has a proven track record in offering products and services in French and providing Francophone job opportunities, whether it be in Quebec or other regions of Canada. It would be reasonable for organizations such as banks to be guaranteed some flexibility in applying language requirements, depending on the nature, size, and complexity of their operations, their distribution channels, and the products and services they offer. It is also important to bear in mind that small and medium-sized banks would not have the resources that large banks could deploy to meet certain requirements. Furthermore, The banking sector recognizes the importance of offering quality, well-paying jobs in Francophone communities and will not hesitate to do so as long as there are qualified candidates to fill them. We note that very small areas in certain provinces are designated as regions with a strong Francophone presence. In these areas, it could prove even more difficult to recruit qualified candidates for certain positions. We therefore recommend considering, during future revisions of the legislation, tightening the criteria used to designate an area as a region with a strong Francophone presence. With regard to human resources, our members support the provisions regarding grandfathering. They nevertheless recommend a flexible application of the concept of supervision of a Francophone employee in a region with a strong Francophone presence, depending on the specific circumstances of each situation. Finally, before the requirements come into effect, it is essential to allow for a sufficient implementation period to adapt systems, to train staff, and to hire additional employees. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Monsieur Prudhomme. You were before the Senate yesterday, so I think the members will ask even harder questions, so get ready. I would like to give the floor to Monsieur Godin for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank our 4 witnesses for being here today. I will start with the AFO. You talked about designating strong Francophone presence regions. And what I understood is what is presented is the minimum. What you're looking for is to go further. What does that mean to you? In the law, in Ontario, here we're talking about Ontario, there are a lot of regions that are represented. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 regions. What are you missing in this list? The rest of the province? Monsieur Godin, one of Franco-Ontarians' strengths is that we live everywhere in Ontario. We have a history of being in Ontario. The bill omits some areas in Ontario, such as Windsor, Chatham-Kent, Sarnia, London, among others. These are all areas that are designated under the law. They are recognized by the federal government for services in French. For example, Penetanguishene. I lived there for a while. When we look at the concentration of Francophones in this in the province, we're everywhere in the province. I'm currently visiting all of these communities, and people in these communities are saying that the federal government is forgetting about them. They are feeling like second-class citizens inside of their communities. Okay, well, 1 second. You might be surprised to hear this, but what I understand is that the law on the use of French that we're talking about today does not fulfill the requirement. You said it. French in Ontario can't be defined by a percentage. What I understand by this is that we must do much more to cover the territory completely in Ontario to make sure Francophones and Francophiles have access to services in French in federally regulated businesses. Is that what you want? Yes, there are essential regions for me, especially the ones that are the most historic in Ontario. We can't forget about major city centers such as Mississauga and Toronto. Those are major areas where there are important amounts of Francophones who live there. There are organizations and agencies that are designated that offer services in French. There's centers in Ontario that offer services in French. So in these city centers, we're having more and more French immigration? Okay, I think we are on the same wavelength here. We understand the same thing. Okay, so I am going to talk to the Canadian Bankers Association, the CBA. You talked about flexibility. You talked about implementation and the appropriate amount of time for implementation. My first question is 2 years enough for implementing this? And my second question is, what do you think, what is flexibility to you? So, to answer your first question, 2 years? That seems like a reasonable transition period. I didn't mention this in my introduction because some of you already know. You're well aware of the CBA. We represent 60 banks, and 40 of these banks offer services to individuals. It's a competitive sector. 2 years seems reasonable, a good start at least. But all of the members don't experience the same thing. There are big banks, the ones we know of, and then there are small banks who have limited resources. So that's the first part of your question. So you mentioned that you offer many services. Your clients, your members offer many services to Canadians through different means, such as the web, for example. And when we invest in technology, and I'd like to reiterate, technology often evolves and progresses in English. Are you 100% bilingual in all of your operations when you put forward communications with clients? 20 seconds, so please answer quickly. We serve clients in the language of their choice. When it comes to digital banking platforms and banking applications, the client can choose the language in their choice. Do you lose clients if they can't have the service in their language choice? Okay, I'd like to give the floor to Madame Chenat. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I'd like to continue the conversation with the CBA. I didn't hear your answer on flexibility, and I'm interested in this. What does flexibility mean to you? Christian, maybe you can answer. So if you look at the requirement when it comes to employee supervision, an employee must be supervised in French. So, flexibility. We think there may be some guidelines that should dictate how this should be done. Flexibility could be... It could be like if someone who is outside of the region, who is designated, can they supervise the employee who is in that region that was designated? It's also a question of offering services. If there isn't an employee that can serve the client on the spot, can the client make a meeting at a future date? Could an employee go from one branch to another so that they can offer that service in French? Thank you for your explanation. So that's one of the problems in Francophonie. It's having to book an appointment instead of having the service right away. So your flexibility is kind of the opposite of what we're looking for. And when we talk about small and medium size, the banks you're talking about, can you elaborate? I can't answer that. Well, you're certainly above 100 employees. Surely. Okay, because I'd like to be I would like to understand your small and medium-sized businesses, but what we're talking about here is having services for businesses who have under 100 employees. So I have the tendency to say that Canada is going in a certain way, and with our geopolitics, we need to consider bilingualism and enforce bilingualism in Canada. Bilingualism will define Canada. It will be one of our strengths, and we must be more aggressive on this. So I'd like to address you as the AFO in your business. What I understand is that as the FCFA mentioned, you agree with the recommendation to designate the territory to identify Francophone zones? The short answer is yes. When it comes to businesses, we're talking about Francophone businesses. We were talking about institutions before, but I'm talking about businesses. Because obviously there are Francophone businesses in Ontario. Can you identify Francophone businesses? Is that something you can add in the criteria? That might be something interesting to add.
It is realistic. In 2021 or 2022, OFA came up with a document. Well, in fact, there's a federation that was created by the government of Ontario, and 30,000. In fact, there's $80 billion that is contributed to the economy. I can't tell you all the stats. It's the Southern Ontario. But we know that Southern Ontario is an economic driver for Ontario. And there are Francophones in all of these regions. One thing that's difficult is that sometimes people are in business, so they remain in business. They're not necessarily in business in French. And some of these businesses, when they get a chance to do business with, for example, credit unions, and there are many in the south of Ontario. So, as part of this reality, that is to say, we're expanding the criteria to have greater Francophone presence. Now, what you were saying is that it's important to have time for recruiting and training. So it's kind of like the chicken or the egg. If you do one thing, we'll have more talent, but if we don't do it, there'll be less talent. So do you think it would be helpful, and in fact, the fact that we need to have the talent in order to deliver, would this be an impediment? There are Francophone post-secondary institutions in Ontario. Of course, we could probably get organized and find out what programs could be put in place to meet those needs. But we do have a great network of colleges and of Francophone bilingual universities. I think we have the capacity as Franco-Ontarians. I think we could train people in a number of areas. Very good. 15 seconds. Thank you very much. Mr. Beaulieu, 6 minutes. The act will be implemented 2 years after having been implemented in Quebec. During those 2 years, would it not be a good thing to have a process that starts right now in order to start promoting this among businesses and organize consultations with organizations? Because I think that in Quebec, things have already been in motion for the last 50 years. I look forward to services in Ontario. The sooner the better. It's important. We understand that it takes time to put these services in place. I really do hope that the federal government will work with representative organizations and organizations in regions to start this advocacy work, at least communicating with the public to say, listen, starting on this date, these services will be available. So there is an awareness, campaign that has to happen among users and businesses. So I am looking forward to this, but I think there will be a transition period, and that will take time. That will be for the businesses. Perhaps in your request, you could ask for a process to get the ball rolling upstream, even if it's not implemented right away. Designation for a strong Francophone presence. That's really at the crux of this. You said earlier that there are regions that are bilingual for federal institutions, but they're not designated by the Act, the UFPBA. Yes, in Southern Ontario, the federal government offers services in French in some regions. Well, in the entire province, there are regions. These regions are not aligned with the regions in the UFPBA, nor with the regions under the Ontario French Services Act. One of our concerns is that there are 3 designation systems for 3 different things. And, they're not the same. So in a number of regions, people don't really know what services they're entitled to. And so it creates confusion. And I fear that we're going to create even more confusion with the UFPBA, which does not use the same borders as the other legislation. So it would be important that the same territories, the same, delimitations be used. I imagine that one day that would be the intention, but I understand why we'd start by some regions rather than others. But in your request, that's something that you could add. The worst thing that could happen is that they say no. But I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Because if we look at the Greater Toronto region, it wasn't open at all. I mean, that's absolutely absurd. They use sectors from Statistics Canada, dissemination areas. There may be other things. You talked about areas where there are historic communities, like in Windsor or elsewhere. So that might be good. And feel free to send us those requests. Oh, pardon me. I'll give you the example of recommendation 3 in our brief. Once the geographic units are chosen, and if they mask real Francophone presence, well, it's important to take into account institutional and territorial realities for Francophone communities in a minority situation. We are identifying first and foremost a proactive approach for the federal government. So that's in line with the FCFA and the complementary tools that were identified. So we want that complementarity. So the idea would be to broaden when necessary. One thing that's important, I couldn't verify it, but I did speak about it with the FCFA. Complaints. The system is right now supposed to be based on complaints, but that has to be anonymous. And recourse options have to be made available. For example, the right to work in French. There are a lot of employees who don't dare speak up. It's been the law in Quebec for a long time, but they feared reprisals from their employers. So mechanisms need to be in place. In this way, it can be anonymous. And of course, employees have to have options for recourse. It's mostly the minister who ensures the follow-up, but the act isn't stringent enough. There aren't fines or anything like there are in the other act. The question of complaints and the way it's used in this act, that's disappointing. The French Services Act in Ontario has an active offering. I'd like to see that same concept of an active offering in this new regulation at the federal level. Maybe not for this iteration, but for future ones, yes. We understand that while we're in a transition period, the first 5 years, there's going to be mistakes made. But at some point, there can't just be excuses. Well, the regulation is being drafted now, so now's the time. And then the commissioner has to have the option of investigating at the outset. For banks, 10 seconds left. Are there banks in Quebec that are not under Bill 101? Well, for over 30 years now, they have been voluntarily under that. Sorry, Mr. Beaulieu, but your time is up. Colleagues, we're going on to the second round. Since we started late and that we suspended, I'm going to have to cut down the time for the second round. Mr. Dalton, 3 minutes. Ms. Mingarelli, 3 minutes. Mr. Beaulieu, 1.5 minutes. Mr. Alcouri, 3 minutes. And at the end of the question period, I will need 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes of your attention for an administrative matter. With what you just mentioned, I see that we're going to be going past 5:30. Yes, we are going to go over a little, but just by a few minutes. Okay, that's good. I just wanted to make sure. I'll get back to the colleagues who made requests earlier. So, Mr. Dalton, 3 minutes. Thank you to the witnesses. The AFO, you represent 800,000 people. That's a lot of people. You play an important role, and I agree that what we have now is masking the concentration. It's important. We heard that there are 200,000 francophones and francophiles in Toronto. Do you foresee any resistance, any pushback if we go forward with this and determine the way the legislation is to be implemented? No, you won't get any pushback from francophones in Ontario if you add the regions. The matter of businesses, well, that's for the businesses to say. I don't represent them. But in my work as part of the convention, people want a continuum of services. They want services in French. They want services right from, the beginning of their lives to the end. So they want to be born in French and die in French, and they want to have that continuum in place. And that's what people are saying yes to in the regions. That's what they want. That's what's lacking. And this is what we need as francophones. And that is what is going to make our communities all the more vibrant. And imagine the economic benefits, too, within our communities, because there will be more groups offering French, more institutions, agencies, organizations offering services in French. In my opinion, this will be a huge plus for the Canadian economy. I'd now like to turn to CBA. You talked about technology, cell phones, websites, and so on. All that's very good. What do you think about the future? It's great to talk about where we're at, but what about where we're headed? And artificial intelligence, AI. That's really going to change how we communicate in the next 5 to 10 years. What do you foresee the impact of AI being on your sector? And I'd also like to open the question up to Ontario as well. Very quickly, earlier, in my opening remarks, I explained that there are different channels for communicating with the banking sector. We're talking a lot about in-person services. So all major decisions around investment, and I will get to AI, but all major decisions, well, for those people will go into branches. Now it's 10% of transactions that take place in a branch, but the branches are there to stay in the banking sector. They're very important. 77% of transactions take place, in fact, with the help of AI. So these are on banking platforms, on your laptop, or on your cell phone, or tablet. And AI, Mr. Prudhomme, I'm sorry, but I do have to cut you off. I'll hand it over now to Ms. Mingarelli. 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'll start with you, Mr. Hominouk. As you know, I'm the MP of Prescott Russell Cumberland, a riding that is very proud and comprises many Franco-Ontarians. Are you hearing from Francophone workers in Ontario who hesitate to use French at work for fear of repercussions? I'll allow my colleague to answer that one. Absolutely. We were talking about the Ontario Convention on French. This is a historic moment for Francophonie because we get to hear directly from these professionals. Sometimes they say they feel invisible, even in the workplace, where professional development tools and other complex tools are not available in French. So this is an issue. It's an obstacle. And sometimes the fact that they're afraid to expose their vulnerability or their language preference, this can lead to situations like ones we're seeing in Francophone Ontario, and I'm sure you're seeing them as well. Thank you. According to your experience, what would really work to help advance practices for Francophones in the workplace? To feel that we're in a safe space where it's allowed. The corporate structure of businesses is the most important factor. Either you're in a business where you can do those things or you can't. And although there may be things on paper saying you can, it's the culture that dictates whether you can or not. I think that essentially that is what makes a difference, and that's what will make the difference in whether or not this draft regulation works or not. 50 seconds. Thank you. I'll now turn to you, the CBA. Either of you, really, if you wish to respond. Your members, are they currently able to offer complete services in French in areas with a strong Francophone presence? In the designated regions, in fact, we haven't had the time to do that analysis with our members. But as my colleague said, in a number of regions that were designated, for example, those in New Brunswick, or even in Ottawa and in certain regions in Eastern Ontario, these services are indeed offered in French. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Mingarelli. I'll now hand it over to Mr. Beaulieu. 1.5 minutes, please. Thank you. To finish up with what we were saying, are there smaller banks that are not subject to the federal jurisdiction? It's a voluntary basis. Yes, they are subject to it on a voluntary basis. If we look in Quebec, 45,000 employees, Quebecers who work in banks, they work in French, and they grow and work in French. Excellent. Perhaps there are some smaller ones, some banks that aren't subject to it. Well, listen, they are in competition with one another, so if they want to serve their clients in the language of their choice, they have to include French. Now, this is going to be a choice between two competing linguistic systems. And there could be a loss of efficiency because of, duplication and so on. If there are banks or smaller banks that are reluctant, they'll probably go more towards the federal one because it's not as demanding. Well, if I may, based on my information and my discussions, the banks are already subject to this on a voluntary basis. There's also the Charter of the French language. Okay, well, that's a good thing. Perhaps it'll be a little more difficult outside of Quebec, but we hope that things will go well. Mr. Beaulieu, your time is up. Sorry about that. We had to shorten this round, sorry. Mr. Gill now. Mr. Godin, 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll go over to the CBA now. Mr. Prudhomme, earlier you said something. You said you have quality jobs that are well paid. And at one point, you'll probably have staffing problems for French. Is there a program in place by the association for its members to help individuals evolve and grow in French in the financial sector? At the association, I'll repeat that we're not part of operations, but I know that for our members, they have linguistic policies in place. They have codes of conduct. Why am I talking about codes of conduct? Well, the gentleman next to me was speaking about values within businesses. At banks, inclusion is very important, and language is part of diversity. But you know that language is not inclusion. It's not a minority either. It has to be part of a whole as part of a bilingual country. These are not exceptions, the fact that one speaks French. No. Well, what I'm mentioning is that all employees who speak, whether they speak French or English, have to contribute. And there are things put in place, training, ongoing training programs. But as an association, you don't have a program for the members because the members do it already independently. Is that it? Yes, the members already do that independently, and they do it quite well. But as you're hearing today, we make it our duty to communicate as an association in English and in French, and we have employees who speak French. Would you say you're doing better than Air Canada? Well, I won't take a stance on that. No, but my question will be quite clear. Do you communicate 50% in English and French to all of your members? All of your communications are bilingual? Well, I moderate work groups in Quebec. We also have work groups in the Atlantic, for example, in Quebec. But in the Atlantic region, well, it could happen. It depends on the location where the meeting takes place. Yes, indeed, it can. So it can be done, but you don't do it automatically. It's just an operational question. I see. Well, it's only been 3 months that we've also had the Atlantic provinces as part of our group. So, okay, well, then I'll give you that as a mandate. Mr. Hominiuk, how much time do I have left, Mr. Chair? 35 seconds. An active offering rather than going for a punishment type of model. Can you elaborate on that concept? I'd like to hear from you on that. Well, the concept of an active offering is quite simple. When you show up somewhere, you get offered a service in English or in French. It's that simple. It's good for business too. Professional development or business development, rather. But when a company doesn't uphold its legal requirements, there needs to be means for, imposing that and requiring it. How does the escalation work? Sorry, but your time is up, Mr. Godin. Sorry.
Monsieur Elguerie, for 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask Mr. Hominiuk and Mr. Petitfrère. In Quebec, we believe that French is a richness for all of humanity. What are the efforts that you have done to protect, promote, and make French flourish in Canada? The AFO works entirely in French. Our team works 100% in French. We cover 150 non-government, non-profit organizations. We represent many people from the Franco-Ontarian community. We make sure that French exists in Ontario. It's part of our DNA. We want Canada to be able to keep Francophones Francophone for the rest of their life and for future generations. Great example. Do you have a French language program for newcomers in your province? Currently, the Assembly is taking it case by case. We are looking at the situation. We are examining different communities. In all of the communities that we visit, that we examine, we understand, it's clear. Immigrants who speak French, who come to these communities, will become part of the Franco-Ontarian community. Right now, it's a matter of putting the tools, making tools available in these communities. There are people who work hard to encourage integration, but we must do more. We need to ensure integration and a sense of community. We make a choice to not use the word French language program, but rather a sense of belonging. So we're opening the discussion. We want people to become part of the Franco-Ontarian community, and we want to make this a more welcoming environment, encourage Francophone people to keep their French and flourish and have different identities. Thank you. I'd like to thank all of our colleagues for being here. Thank you for mentioning Etobicoke. It's not often mentioned at the Official Language Committee. I need a few minutes with my colleagues. I'd like to talk about a few subjects. First of all, there are many subjects that we need to talk about. We haven't finished talking about this as a community. I'd like to reserve the last hour next Tuesday to talk about these subjects in camera. This will be confidential. Does that work for everyone? Yes? Okay. And the second issue, there's a press release rather. It has been handed out. I will table the report this week. Do I have your approval to distribute this press release? Yes? Do we have a dissident opinion? Is this on division? Is it the committee's... Would the committee like to do this on division? No? Are there objections? The bloc would like to be on division? No is no. I know. Okay, so I can distribute the press release rather. They want to distribute the press release. No to modify it. Can we be clear? It's not clear for me. Okay, my question is the following. I have a press release. Usually, a press release is not approved by the whole committee. It's something the chair does. But we've done this with a different study, and I wanted to make you aware that I am going to release the press. I'm going to release the press release when I also release the report. You proposed that we mention or include the report on division. So I asked the committee if they agree to include what Monsieur Beaulieu is asking for, mentioned in the press release. I'd like to give my opinion. Mr. Chair, from my experience, all press releases that were written in previous committees were spoken about here to agree on the committee. No, on the release, rather. So you're saying that you are asking our opinion on it, but usually it's something that was discussed about around the table. So right now the Bloc Québécois is on division, and I'd like to proceed to a vote. On the press release, the Bloc wants to show that they are on division. You realize you don't need the committee. You can do it anyway. If you're asking me to decide, 1 minute, I'm going to come back to you.
Mario, je vais expliquer pourquoi j'avais dit non, puis après, ça ne dérange pas, on va la...
OK. Donc, 2 points.
So, two things. First, from my experience, I spoke with the clerk. It's up to the chair to approve the language for the press release. I know that's not the norm in all communities, but that's from my experience. When it comes to how we will proceed, right now, in order for there to be a vote, there needs to be a formal motion proposed. And then once the debate is done, we can move to a vote. We saw that earlier. I don't know. But anyway, does anybody want to talk about including what Monsieur Beaulieu asked about including the Bloc's opinion on dissent in the press release? I think what we're worried about here is that dissent is not with a majority. So what I understood is that we had a consensus around the table even though the Bloc had dissent. That's what I wanted to mention at the committee. Usually, it's up to the chair. But this isn't a major issue at the end of the day. With all the work we've done, I think we shouldn't be talking about division and rather the report. You can talk about the elements of division in the House. Well, when is this going to be presented in the House? I know that efforts were made, but dissidence is not, or we are not divided on all elements. I'm not blaming the chair, but we know his opinion. Okay, this is my first reaction. I don't want it to be seen badly, but I just want to say that we worked well together. We all agree that Regulation 7 must be worked on. What we hope, we respect that you are on division. But I want journalists to see this and to understand that we're all working together to put pressure. If we say that in the press release that there is, they are dissenting, everything seems like we are fighting each other. But we are working constructively together. So you can write that you're dissenting, but I don't think that will give the impact that we are looking for here. We are trying to send a message that we are united, with a few caveats, but that is that's the essential element of our message. I don't want it to be perceived badly. I appreciate your comment. First of all, I think every party has the responsibility they have the right to communicate what they want. But on top of that, in the press release, it's written that there is dissidence in the among the committee. The Treasury Board is going to say that I'm looking at the analyst. I have it under my eyes. Aren't they going to say that there's a majority of witnesses? Okay, they say it. No, what I'm saying is that among the committee, there is dissidence. In the sense that the Treasury Committee is telling us to do our work in depth. It's up to their discretion. That's one thing. And as an MP, I'm going to defend MPs' rights, all parties' rights, to express themselves. So if we're on division and we don't write it in the committee, we're being two-faced here. It could have many consequences. It could have positive and negative consequences. And it's up to him. It's his choice. So I don't understand my colleague's objection on this dissent. It should be written. I'm not going to go all up in arms, but I made my comments. That's the difference for me between the press release, which is to announce what we've done together. We all agree, and that's the strength of our report. We all agree that there's work to do, and we have many recommendations. So, of course, we recognize the witnesses' division, but we are standing in solidarity. We're saying we're getting there, and we want journalists to see our message. That we want them to see that we all agree to make these recommendations. That will be much stronger than saying that there is dissent. Because as soon as we put it in the press release that there is dissidence and it's up to every party. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But as soon as we do that, that's what they're going to notice. That's what the newspapers are going to pick up. And that would be unfortunate because it goes against what we're trying to do. And so, food for thought. There is dissidence. But what we're trying to say is the work that we've done and where we want to see impact. I think we can all agree that we don't want to mention that there's dissidence. And I know Monsieur Beaulieu will highlight it somewhere, but that's what I have to say. We're not going to get all up in arms over here either. I just want everybody to understand that. For me, it's Quebec's point, Quebec's opinion on dissidence. We published the proposals relating to the report. I want to go back on what I was saying earlier. I didn't want to waste time, but Monsieur Godin made a proposal. We are asking for documents. This isn't a proposal for further study. I wasn't able to say this earlier. What I think it would be better to express ourselves rather than close the debate. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you, Mr. Godin. Beaulieu. Yes, thank you to you as well. Okay, so colleagues, what are we going to do? We have a press release that was passed around. You have the choice to do what you'd like. We will figure it out. I can specify where we are what we are dissenting on. It's not on everything. It's mostly to represent Quebec's opinion on the report that was done. Okay, so should I give you the choice or... No, the choice is up to you. Okay, so we're back to square one. Okay, that's everything for the day. The meeting is adjourned.
Bye.